Hey everyone, did you know that over 90% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button? If you enjoy our content, take a second to subscribe. It's free and it really helps us keep bringing you great stories every day. The night before Daniel's wedding was supposed to be a celebration. The house was alive with laughter, soft music, and the clink of champagne glasses. Everyone admired how elegantly the estate had been decorated. Twinkling lights, white roses, and the soft hum of violins playing in the distance. But Thomas Hargrove, the father of the groom, stood alone on the balcony overlooking the vast gardens, his expression unreadable. His world, once stable and neatly ordered, was quietly crumbling beneath him. A wealthy real estate mogul with a reputation for integrity, Thomas had spent his life building his empire from the ground up. He wasn't the kind of man who relied on others for much, but he'd always trusted his family. That trust had been the bedrock of his world, until now. His son Daniel was marrying Elena Matthews, a woman Thomas had only recently begun to question. She was beautiful, charming, and from an impressive family, or so it seemed. She had appeared suddenly in Daniel's life just 9 months ago, and everything had moved fast since. Too fast. It wasn't suspicion that had first alerted Thomas, but instinct. Something in Elena's eyes when she looked at him. Not quite fear, not quite defiance, but a quiet calculation. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of people trying to hide something. He didn't want to ruin his son's happiness, but something pushed him to dig deeper. 3 nights ago, he asked his longtime private investigator, Marvin Blake, to discreetly look into Elena's background. Marvin hadn't taken long. That evening, Marvin had arrived at the estate with a face that told Thomas everything before he even opened his mouth. He passed over a slim folder of documents and sat quietly while Thomas read through it. What he found chilled him. Elena had once been involved in a legal dispute involving another wealthy family, one that had ended in an annulled marriage and a sealed settlement. There was also a man, Nicholas Wade, a name Thomas didn't recognize, but who appeared frequently in the background of Elena's past. A businessman with no clear source of income but connections in high society. But what shattered Thomas most wasn't Elena or Nicholas. It was his wife, Vivian. In the files Marvin handed him were copies of private messages between Vivian and Elena. Friendly at first, then strategic. Cold. Vivian had helped orchestrate Elena's introduction to Daniel. She had even advised Elena on how to win Daniel's trust, how to appear vulnerable without seeming manipulative. Thomas read a line from one of Vivian's messages and felt the floor vanish beneath him. He's old-fashioned. If you can make him think you're in love with Daniel, he'll never question your motives. You'll be inside the family before he even knows what happened. And then another message. This one from Nicholas Wade to both Vivian and Elena. Once the marriage license is signed, we'll move forward with the asset transfers. Daniel won't even know what's missing until it's too late. Keep playing your parts. Thomas closed the folder slowly and stared out of the window into the night, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. His own wife had betrayed him, his son was being used, and someone outside the family was about to rip everything away from them under the illusion of love and celebration. For hours, Thomas sat in the study alone, the silence pressing against his chest like a vice. He could storm into Daniel's room, demand answers, cancel the wedding. But instinct, and something deeper, warned him not to. If he acted in anger, they'd cover their tracks. Vivian had always been clever, too clever. Elena had a calmness that was almost unnerving. And Nicholas? The man was invisible. Number Thomas couldn't just react. He needed to be smarter. He needed proof that would burn through every mask they wore. So he called Marvin again and told him they had one night to gather everything. Documents, surveillance, emails, transfers, anything they could use to expose the entire scheme. By the time dawn approached, Thomas had barely slept. He watched as the estate came alive again, this time for the wedding day. Staff hurried about with floral arrangements, chefs prepared elaborate meals, and the wedding planner nervously checked her clipboard a dozen times. Vivian appeared at his door just after sunrise, radiant in a soft pink robe. She kissed his cheek as if nothing had changed. "You're quiet this morning," she said, pouring herself coffee. Just tired, he replied smoothly, hiding the folder beneath a stack of newspapers. Vivian gave him a small smile. It'll be a beautiful day. Our son is marrying the woman of his dreams. Thomas watched her closely. Yes, dreams. She raised an eyebrow at his tone, but said nothing more. Later that morning, Thomas asked to speak with Daniel alone. He wanted to tell him everything, but as he looked at his son's glowing face and saw the excitement in his eyes, something in him faltered. Daniel loved Elena. He was blind to everything else. If Thomas rushed in now, his words would be dismissed as paranoia or bitterness. He needed undeniable truth. And more than that, he needed witnesses. That's when the idea came to him. He would wait for the ceremony in front of everyone. Family, friends, media. With everyone present, the lies wouldn't be able to survive. He called Marvin again and gave him instructions. Discreetly plant microphones, cameras, anything legal that could catch even a whisper of scheming. He wanted the guests seated with ears wide open when he pulled back the curtain. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Thomas kept his expression calm, even when he caught Elena whispering with Vivian by the fountain. Even when he spotted a man in a tailored gray suit watching everything from a distance, Nicholas Wade finally showing his face. At the rehearsal dinner that evening, Thomas stood to give a toast. His glass shimmered in the candlelight as dozens of eyes turned to him. I've always believed in two things, he began, his voice steady. Loyalty and timing. There was polite laughter. He smiled, though his eyes remained cold. I look forward to tomorrow, to watching my son begin his future, with the woman he loves. But before that, I want to make sure everyone is truly ready for what's coming. Vivian tilted her head slightly as if unsure of his meaning. Elena smiled softly, and Nicholas, standing at the bar, didn't move. Thomas finished his toast, then took his seat. The night carried on, filled with music and dancing, but he remained still, calculating, waiting. By midnight, the estate was quiet again. Guests retired to their rooms. Daniel was whisked away by his friends for a final toast. Elena disappeared into the bridal suite. Vivian said she was going to bed. Thomas remained in his study, the folder open in front of him, Marvin on the phone with updates. The pieces were almost in place. Tomorrow, at the altar, the masks would fall, and the truth would finally be free. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and still, the kind of calm that almost seemed unnatural. A gentle breeze moved through the trees as birds chirped across the Hargrove estate. But inside the grand mansion, beneath the polished floors and fragrant floral arches, tension simmered just beneath the surface. Thomas stood at his window, watching as white chairs were arranged under the sprawling oak tree where the ceremony would take place. He wore a dark tailored suit, his tie slightly loosened, his mind already racing ahead. The night had been long. He and Marvin had worked quietly and thoroughly, pulling together a collection of undeniable proof. Wire transfers, voice recordings, photographs, email threads. The goal had been simple. Prepare a moment so revealing, so irrefutable that even Vivian, Elena, and Nicholas wouldn't be able to twist their way out of it. He wasn't just going to stop the wedding. He was going to reveal everything publicly on their grand stage. By mid-morning, guests began arriving. Lavish black cars lined the driveway, and murmurs of admiration filled the garden as people took in the sheer beauty of the venue. Everything was perfect, or at least it appeared that way. Vivian moved through the crowd like the perfect hostess, smiling, welcoming, her laughter carrying like wind chimes. She wore a cream-colored gown and pearls, elegant and poised. No one would have suspected the storm Thomas knew was coming. Elena appeared just before noon, escorted down the grand staircase by her bridesmaids. She was breathtaking in her lace gown, her hair woven into a crown of soft curls, her eyes wide with false emotion. Even Thomas had to admit, she played the role well. But he saw it now. The glances exchanged with Nicholas Wade, who stood in the back row, pretending to be a distant cousin, the way she barely looked at Daniel as he beamed at her from across the garden. Thomas moved through the crowd with a quiet purpose. He greeted guests with a smile, accepted compliments, shook hands. No one could have guessed what he carried in his inner jacket pocket, a small flash drive that held everything. As the ceremony began, the music swelled. Daniel took his place at the altar, standing proud and slightly nervous. The officiant welcomed everyone and began the opening words of the ceremony. Thomas sat in the front row, Vivian beside him. Her hand briefly touched his and he let it rest there, unmoving. Elena began her walk down the aisle, her father, an actor hired for the occasion, Marvin had discovered, walking beside her. Guests turned to admire her. Phones lifted, smiles widened. But Thomas watched Nicholas Wade. He stood still, arms crossed, sunglasses masking his eyes. As Elena approached, Nicholas gave the faintest nod. Elena didn't look at him, but Thomas saw her jaw tighten for just a second. The ceremony progressed with elegance. Vows were exchanged, voices trembling with emotion. Daniel looked utterly in love. Elena's performance was flawless, tearful, soft-spoken, devoted. And just as the officiant prepared to pronounce them husband and wife, Thomas stood. "Wait," he said clearly, stepping forward. Gasps rippled through the seated guests. The officiant paused mid-sentence. Daniel turned in confusion, his brow furrowed. Elena's smile faltered for the first time. Vivian rose beside him. "Thomas," she said softly, "what are you doing?" Thomas turned to her. "Something I should have done long ago." He stepped up beside Daniel and Elena, pulling the small remote from his jacket pocket. A large monitor behind the ceremony, originally intended for playing a photo montage, came to life with a quiet flicker. "I know this isn't what anyone expected today," Thomas said to the crowd. "But before we go further, I think it's only right to ensure that this celebration is truly built on truth." He tapped the remote again, and a video began to play. It was grainy, taken from a hidden camera Marvin had placed in the study. Elena's voice came first. "He thinks I love him. He's so sure of it. After tomorrow, the estate, the trusts, it's all within reach." Then came Nicholas's voice. "And once the power of attorney is signed, we'll be able to start the asset transfers within days. You just need to keep playing the part until it's done." Whispers swept through the guests like wildfire. Faces turned. Some stood, others stared in disbelief. Elena stepped back. This is edited. It's not real." But the next clip left no room for denial. It was an email chain projected onto the screen with timestamps and addresses. Vivian's words. "Thomas will never see it coming. Daniel is too blind. Just make sure the prenup disappears before the ceremony." A loud murmur rose now. Vivian's eyes went wide, then narrowed as she looked at Thomas. "You've been spying on your own wife?" He turned to her, his voice calm. Number I was uncovering the truth. Elena looked around in panic, then turned to Daniel. "This is a setup. He doesn't want you to be happy." But Daniel was no longer looking at her. His hands had fallen to his sides. His expression, once so full of joy, had turned hollow. "You lied to me?" he asked softly. Elena tried to approach him, but Daniel stepped back. "I gave you everything. I loved you." Daniel, I did love you," she started. Thomas cut her off. "Don't. You love money, control, and you would have taken everything from him." Nicholas began moving toward the back, but two plainclothes security men, hired by Thomas that morning, intercepted him quietly, escorting him off the premises. Vivian stood frozen beside the altar. Her face was pale. "You're destroying our family in front of everyone." "No," Thomas replied, his voice firm. "You did that the moment you betrayed it." He looked to Daniel. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I couldn't let this wedding go forward knowing what I knew. You deserve the truth, not an illusion." Daniel nodded slowly, still trying to process the unraveling of his world. Guests had begun to quietly excuse themselves, a few offering sympathetic glances, others still stunned. Elena stood alone now, the carefully constructed version of herself shattered, her expression slipping from charm to fury. Without a word, she turned and stormed down the aisle, the long train of her gown dragging behind her like a ghost. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, unsure of what to do. Thomas looked out over the crowd, then turned to Daniel. "Let's go inside. We have a lot to talk about." Daniel nodded again, eyes still wide, heart visibly broken. Father and son walked slowly back toward the house, the once perfect ceremony behind them, now a memory scorched by betrayal. As they reached the steps, Daniel finally spoke. "I would have given her everything." "I know," Thomas said gently, "and that's exactly why I couldn't let her take it from you." They entered the house in silence, while outside, the white petals scattered on the ground began to blow away with the wind. The hours after the broken wedding passed in a blur. Inside the once celebratory halls of the Hargrove estate, silence had replaced music. The floral arrangement still stood tall, but their beauty now seemed like an eerie echo of what could have been. Most of the guests had quietly left, many too stunned to say anything meaningful, others merely grateful to have witnessed a scandal they could whisper about for years. Thomas sat alone in his study, the room dimly lit by the afternoon sun pouring through the windows. He stared at a framed photo of Daniel when he was 10, grinning, holding up a science trophy, completely unaware of the complexities that adulthood would bring. He felt tired. More than anything, he was overwhelmed by the strange blend of sadness and clarity. He had done what he knew was right, exposing the conspiracy, but it hadn't come without consequences. His marriage had crumbled publicly. His son had been humiliated on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. And somewhere deep down, a part of Thomas mourned. Not for Vivian, not for Elena, but for the family he thought he had. A quiet knock broke the silence. Daniel stepped in, still in his suit, though the boutonniere had been removed. His eyes were red but focused. "Can I sit?" he asked. Thomas gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course." There was a long pause between them. No one rushed to fill it. It was Daniel who finally spoke. "I can't stop hearing her voice in my head, saying those things about me, about you, about our money." Thomas nodded, listening carefully. "I really thought she loved me," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, I proposed because I believed in her. I believed we could build something." "You did what anyone with a good heart would do," Thomas said. "You trusted. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's character." "But I ignored the signs," Daniel admitted. "The inconsistencies, the evasiveness when I asked about her past, even how fast she agreed to the wedding. Part of me wondered, I just didn't want to see it." "We see what we want to see," Thomas replied, "especially when we want to believe someone loves us." Another silence passed. This time it wasn't tense. It felt necessary. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "And Mom, I still don't get it. Why would she do this? To me? To you?" Thomas swallowed hard, the betrayal still fresh. "Somewhere along the way, Vivian stopped being my partner. Maybe she felt overlooked, maybe she resented the life we built. But rather than talk about it, she found someone who would help her tear it all down instead. I just—" Daniel trailed off. "I never thought I'd lose both of them in one day." "You haven't lost me," Thomas said gently. "I'm still here." Daniel gave a weak smile, his lips tight. "I know. That's the only part that makes this bearable." They sat in quiet companionship for a while longer before Daniel stood. "I'm going to take a walk. I need some air." Thomas nodded. "Take your time, and if you need anything—" "I'll come find you," Daniel said. As the door closed, Thomas looked back at the photo on his desk and sighed. The world could twist and turn, but he would always protect his son, even from people they once called family. 2 days later, Vivian returned to collect her belongings. She didn't announce her arrival, but Thomas had anticipated it. She walked into the house with a faint chill around her, dressed in expensive sunglasses and a coat too formal for the weather. Thomas met her in the foyer. "I assume you're here for the last of your things?" he said. "I won't stay long," Vivian replied, her tone measured. "I have no desire for theatrics." "I think we passed the point of theatrics when you conspired to empty our accounts," he replied. Vivian removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were lined with fatigue, but not regret. You made a public scene, she said. You could have handled it privately. Thomas held back the bitter laugh that rose in his throat. You wanted privacy for betrayal. I chose truth. She shook her head almost pitifully. You always had to play the hero. I didn't need to play anything, Vivian. You did this to yourself. She walked toward the staircase but paused. Do you know what I realized? She asked. You were never really in love with me. You loved control. And once I stopped being impressed by your empire, you stopped seeing me. Thomas didn't respond immediately. He weighed her words, not because they hurt, but because they held a grain of twisted truth. Maybe I failed you, he admitted. Maybe I focused too much on building the future and not enough on nurturing the present. But none of that justifies what you did. She didn't argue. She simply turned and walked up the stairs. Thomas didn't follow. When she came back down an hour later, 2 suitcases in hand, she didn't say goodbye. She left the way she had arrived, cold, silent, and removed. He watched from the doorway as the car drove away, taking a lifetime of deception with it. Nicholas Wade, meanwhile, was facing a different fate. The evidence Thomas had gathered, including financial documents and communications, had been turned over to authorities. Marvin helped ensure everything was submitted through legal channels. A quiet investigation had begun into not only Nicholas's history of fraudulent marriages, but also multiple counts of attempted asset laundering. Thomas didn't care if the world knew what had happened. He only cared that justice would. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began to rebuild. He moved out of the estate temporarily, spending time with friends and working with a counselor Thomas quietly hired for him. He didn't talk about Elena much, but there were moments, late at night, during walks around the garden, when he allowed his father brief glimpses into the pain. She made me believe in something that wasn't real, he once said. But maybe now I get to find something that is. It was the first time Thomas saw real hope in his son's eyes again. The estate, once filled with wedding plans and deceit, returned to its calm rhythm. The staff resumed their routines. Thomas, too, found peace in simple tasks: reading, tending to the garden, writing letters he never sent. And one crisp evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Daniel returned home for dinner. They sat in the garden, the same place where the ceremony was supposed to take place. 2 plates of warm food sat between them, untouched for a while. You know, Daniel said quietly, if you hadn't stepped in, I would have married her. I would have given her everything. Thomas looked at him, then nodded. But you didn't, because we saw through the illusion. Daniel took a deep breath. Thank you, not just for stopping it, for believing in me enough to tell the truth. You'll have scars, Thomas said. We both will, but that's how we grow stronger. And as the light faded, they finally began to eat, side by side, no longer just father and son, but survivors of something deeper. Something that had tested everything they believed about love, loyalty, and truth. The past had unraveled in the most painful way imaginable. But the future? The future was now theirs to rebuild brick by brick, day by day, together.